Hello everyone. Sorry if people jumped on the first live stream. I screwed up a bit, so that's why I just start all over again. What I wanted to say at first is I did prepare this video for roughly a week, and I wanted to record it actually yesterday, but as shit it had a fan on Twitter. I just want to make clear it's not a response primarily to what has happened yesterday, but I think it explains a lot of behavior pattern we see at the moment. So I was actually asked on Twitter, and someone said, why is it that when you confront people with facts, why they completely ignore the facts and seem to get aggressive, or so much emotions involved? And I thought this is actually an interesting question, especially when we have at the moment the Letitia Stout trial, and you listen to her and you think no matter how the evidence is presented against her, you always hear her just coming up with more excuses, more stories, and a lot of times you might think, why is someone not just confessing? I mean, it's just getting ridiculous, but people just seem to stand in front of a wall and they are unable to overcome this barrier. So I want to go through some of the thinking patterns, and it's basically what makes life so hard for certain people. And it's also why when people have a different thinking pattern like me, why we have a hard time to actually understanding where they're coming from. Because for us, it's mainly like, why are they also irrational and just fired up? But it all has a deeper root. So I will just go through the presentation, and later on I will write probably some stamps underneath so that people can just jump to the right section. Okay, so the first, or the major concept, which is an underlying fundament for all of these behavior patterns, is called self-justification. So the thing is, we all experience a form of self-justification at certain points, and it's also healthy, and this is just how a human brain works. But the difference is just to what extent people experience it. And this concept was initially discovered, and it's the root cause for most of relationship problems. And this is actually the interesting thing, because initially you saw this happening in relationships, and I will give you later on some examples. But now we see it just spreading over the whole society, and especially social media. And so I think when we look at examples from our relationship, for close relationships, we will all recognize the pattern, but we are just not used to applying them in the broader society about random things. So what it basically means is that if a person is in a conflict situation, a lot of times they don't just see that what they did or a fact or anything is criticized. They think a part of themselves is under threat. So I can bring, for example, it's when you are in a close relationship, yeah, and you have the argument about, oh, you didn't clean up the dishes or something. Then it's not just about the dishes, or it should be just about the dishes, about the behavior that someone forgets doing the dishes. But the other person gets it like someone is criticizing me, my personality, how I do things, I'm dumb, I forget everything, all this kind of things. And that's why they feel under threat. So in a close relationship, this makes more sense, especially if you would live with a partner who constantly says, you forgot to bring the bin out, you forgot to do the dishes, and so on. So it can build up. And of course, at some point, your self-defense mode in your brain just jumps in to say, no, it's enough, I'm not that bad, and what's happening? Okay, so the first person who actually came up with the whole concept, that was this lovely guy here. His name was Leon Festinger, and he actually found that people whose belief was disconfirmed, they were even more adamant to hold on to this belief, even when they were proven wrong, which was a very interesting concept. So let me show you the other one. So in his example, it was actually that people believed the world will end at a certain date. And then obviously the world didn't end, and you didn't need to prove it to them. They experienced themselves. So hey, great, I'm not dead, so the world is still there, so obviously something was wrong. Ironically, the same people, they were so like emotionally involved. They insisted on they are wrong, and then all these kind of explanations. The calendar from 2000 years ago, it was just wrong. I think we read the year wrong. I think there was just something weird with the moon, that's why it wasn't there, but actually it should have been. We've been right. It's just now we all die a year later and all this kind of stuff. And you just think, why are you just say, okay, maybe the world is just not ending, but impossible. So, and the reason why it's so impossible to admit it is a concept. This is simply called cognitive dissonance, which is, in generally, people want to believe that they are reasonable and they are kind and they're logical, intelligent, all these kind of things. But at the same time, someone came along and proved that one of their beliefs is unreasonable. So, and this is just clashing with their concept of selves, the way how they see themselves. So the only way out is they can either accept that their belief was unreasonable and basically say, okay, I've been wrong. Or the other way is to reject any knowledge that makes the belief unreasonable. So no matter what facts you present or anything, they will just reject it because their need to preserve their self-image is so much greater than any fact you can actually present. Um, this is a very tricky situation because at the end of the day, these people, they're fighting with themselves and not really with the fact provided. It's their own self-concept. And the issue is, for example, so I know I'm a person, yeah? And I have my personality, I have my good sides, my bad sides. As usual, no one is perfect. But my opinion is something separate. This is like a suitcase I carry, I guess. And I can pack different things in the suitcase, and I can change the suitcase, depending on, oh, now I have to pack something else in it. Now this suitcase is not suitable anymore, so I can change it. But I am not my opinion. My opinion is changeable. But for a lot of people, this is not the case. They are so immersed with it that even a politics or something, it becomes so ingrained in them that they are their opinion. So they just can't unglue themselves from whatever it is. It's just all the same. Then this is the same pattern of thinking also applies in different areas. And this is one example. So they did an experiment, and what they basically did was they had a group of students and they gave them a very boring task to do. But the one group, they got paid £1 for it, and the other group got paid £20. So now this is actually a very interesting outcome, because the students who were only paid £1 or $1, they were the ones coming out of the experiment and telling basically lies to other students about, oh yeah, it was fun, it wasn't boring at all, it was a great experience and all this kind of thing. But then when they actually spend more time with them and then dig deeper as to why they would say these kind of things, while the people who got paid $20 actually went out was like, oh, what a waste of my time, stupid, boring task. So they were like, what's actually going on, So the reason behind all of this was that the students who got paid only $1, they wanted to believe they are reasonable people and they're intelligent and logic, and they have respect for themselves, which meant that the fact they would have to admit they just wasted their time, did a completely stupid, boring task and fell for it, and only got paid $1, seemed so unreasonable to them that they had to make the whole task a bit bigger in their brain to make it sound more valuable. This is actually the same concept what you have sometimes when, my partner is a music producer, so a lot of times when you go in these music studios, you have other music producers around, and there's nothing wrong with people starting out, and everyone knows music business is hard, and a lot of them probably don't make much money and work a bit like I record my friend doing some cover for YouTube or something, there's nothing wrong with it. But a lot of them, they try to make themselves sound as if they are like the big guy, you know, and all these kind of things. And a lot of times I was like, why are you doing that? Like, I didn't really understand it, but now it makes a bit more sense, of course, because otherwise, if they will sit there, record someone for like 6 or 8 hours and only earn like, I don't know, 40 quid, that just sounds absolutely unreasonable, and you just can't face it, I guess. So that's why you need um, to make it sound as something bigger as what it actually is. The whole, so you will if once you figure that pattern out of how people react and interact, you will see this. You come across it nearly every day in your life if you interact with people, and this is so interesting because suddenly it's like a, oh, I got it, okay, and then it also helps you to react a bit better because, let's be honest, if you go to a small guy who has just rented a small tiny studio to record his friend, and you would tell him, hey, mate, isn't it just a total waste of your money and time? It doesn't go anywhere. Isn't it nonsense? Like, oh my goodness, you bring them in an existential crisis, in a mental breakdown, and you won't go anywhere. There's no rational thinking. It's also good to know if you have teenage children, they come suddenly up with some plan to, I want to be a supermodel or something, and you try to find a bit of balance, how to say, might not work out, but it's good to have a dream. So it's good when we understand it. So this is explaining it basically again that during a conflict, people enter a major state of this cognitive dissonance thinking of protecting their ego. And they desperately want to believe that they are kind and reasonable people. But then at the same time, in their mind, it clashes when someone else tells them they are not good in a certain way. And then people just become completely unwilling to accept it. So it's much easier for them when they simply convince themselves that something is completely wrong with the other person. And this is actually going back to couples therapy, where you have a lot of times people, they disregard everything the other person says, and it's just about, well, my wife is just crazy, or my husband is just a dick, or all these kind of things. So it doesn't matter anymore what someone says. It can be reasonable, but it will just get rejected, which is a concept. I mean, I think we all got situations in our life where we experience this. It's just, I think, how you handle it. Like I tip into that. I can tip into this behavior sometimes as well until I then step back and think, hang on a minute, did the person actually say, I'm God knows what, or did they say a reasonable fact about, I don't know, I didn't operate the washing machine correctly, or God knows what. So this is actually something where you can learn, but you have to step away and quickly reflect to saying, okay, this is not about me, and they don't say I'm a bad person. It's just I got the wrong setting or something. But this is actually the weird thing. It takes a lot of self-awareness and also a bit of a self-esteem actually to step back and be able to reflect on yourself and to distance yourself from it and not getting so caught up in things. But this is pretty much the main concept. And then something else is playing into it, and probably most of you guys have heard about it. It's the confirmation bias. That people have a complete tendency to only focus on the evidence that is supporting for their view, and they disregard anything else that would support the other person's view or contradict them. The irony about this is, as some of these people, they can get so caught up in the confirmation bias, even when you present them with a fact that contradicts their own view, they manage to take this fact and somehow spin it around so that it becomes supportive for their own concept. So if you ever stood in front of someone and you saw this happening, you are just like, I just want to take my brain out and go for a break or something, because this is so awkward, and the other person, they don't even see it. And no matter how often you try to explain to them this fact is actually against you, they will deny it. So you can give up at that point. Then the next stage is in general the whole escalation of a conflict. I just had to do this. As I said, it wasn't about yesterday. I did this before, but it's true that at some point one person becomes the trigger for another person. And this is then literally like, people go online, they see a profile, and they are already completely nuts before they even know what someone said or anything. But what happens so as soon as this mindset is implemented, it's basically that it doesn't matter what the other person is saying. Everything will be rejected, discredited, or saying it's a lie, it doesn't exist. And the worst part is actually that even when the other person is doing something nice, or tries to give them an olive branch, it will be seen as bad, manipulative, and it's, you can't even try to say anything. And the most important thing is, it's not because that the fact is wrong, but because the association between the fact and the person presenting the fact. So when you take for example the Alex Murdoch trial, I remember the expert witness the defense had on the stand is the guy who testified also in the staircase murder investigation thing. So when you look at this guy, or even the other expert witness who talked about pathology and stuff, they had an impressive resume, and honestly, you couldn't say they are not qualified. Like they were like top notch, but because they've been connected to the defense, so we were like, why would you do that? And where you see this interesting concept as well. At the moment, we have Sarah Boone, the woman who I don't know stuffed her boyfriend in a suitcase and it said, "Oh, forgot about it for 1.5 days." She is like, they have a real issue with her trial because they contacted so many expert witnesses about her mental state and all this kind of stuff, but no expert wants to testify on her behalf. And now an expert witness, they don't have to like the person. They just want someone to explain the concept of this battered spouse and those kind of thing. But the thing is, no one wants to be associated with this client. No one wants to be known and the name connected to this person because, there's a very good documentary also where they interview defense attorneys who had big cases and state assigned defense attorneys. And they basically said, like, you become a hate object for the whole nation and your career can be over. I mean, it has a reason why the defense attorney from Letitia Stout in the opening statement, I mean, this guy basically apologized for his existence and basically said, look, I can't be fucking bothered to be here. I don't want to be here. I hate her or something, just please don't hate me. I just want to be able to breathe in the same room as you do. So I was like, what on earth? But you understand it, of course, because it's just, you don't want to screw up your life. But all of this wouldn't be an issue if people would simply understand a defense attorney, they're doing their job and you don't hate this person, so, but people just can't really do it. I posted this meme yesterday on Twitter because this is now really where everything is going down the drain. So once you have this whole concept that everything associated with one person is just seen as bad and awful anyway, there's also the problem that people respond with their own interpretation of what you actually say. So you can ask a genuine normal question which is a pretty neutral question, yeah? I mean, in that case, I just brought this up. If someone would say regarding Stephen Smith's case, like, could it be a hit and run? And then you hear, you don't want them to get justice. What makes you think anyone deserves to be murdered? And you see, the answer doesn't align to the question, So you wonder a bit like, if these are two puzzle pieces, this doesn't fit at all. So, and a lot of times I think that people sit there and they're like, how do you come? Why are you responding that way? I mean, someone I think posted once a meme saying, if you post on Twitter saying I like cucumbers, and then immediately someone comes back and saying like, okay, so you hate avocados, and you could really say you hate tomatoes too, and how discriminating. I was like, yeah, this is exactly the thing, because what people implement is, you say I like this, is neutral. It doesn't say anything about what you dislike, but other people interpret it differently and think, okay, so then it has to mean he doesn't like da 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 da. Like, just because you have a favorite color doesn't mean you hate all the other colors. But this is it's a thinking pattern, and the problem is, once you get caught up in this kind of um, in this kind of conversation, it's very hard to dig yourself out of it, because it's literally like you are standing in mud and you're just getting deeper, 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 because the other person probably will not understand or be willing to step back at all. And for us, it seems so reasonable. It's like, okay, let me explain you. I didn't mean I had everything else. But for the other person, it just becomes more of a confirmation. So this is like really awkward. And I wanted to bring this example here because a lot of times it's not just about when you voice your own opinion. It's about you state a fact. Yeah. And so I'm a very fact-orientated person. So for me, it's always about the evidence, the facts, or the science, and it's not really I don't know. I would never say, oh, I think you did it, because I know I have a feeling about that. Like that, I can't handle it. Like, but I also can't handle it with people talking to me about stuff, and I ask them, oh, why do you think that? And people just saying, I have a feeling. I think could be a stomach bug, I can't handle this. I need to have something to work with. But this is actually what makes it really tricky for a lot of people, because I gave you this example just to walk you through. Imagine a person says, I'm very convinced this victim, yeah, he was shot and murdered. And they can already explain to you, I know who did it, and I know why, and what they did with the gun. So all this storyline is already spun in their head. They have it, point blank. But then you do an autopsy, and then it shows there was no gunshot wound, and no bullet is found. And it's determined it wasn't a gunshot wound. So the thing is, it's written black on white on the report, no gunshot wound, no bullet found. So this other person now is in a conflict, because this person is like, damn it, oh my God, I would need to challenge my whole concept. Like, I'm a reasonable person. I know it. Like, I wouldn't just spin or make up this whole theory about someone being shot when it wasn't, and, all this kind of things. Now there's a conflict. But the thing is, you can't really take a piece of paper and engage in an argument with it. I mean, yeah, you can shout at it, you can rip it apart or anything, but, you can't really, you can't argue with it. And the problem what these people have is, this is a confusion state for this person, So they are confronted with something which they perceive as a threat to themselves. So what happens is, they want to engage with someone they can argue with to get a clarification or a reassurance about themselves. So what they try to do then in the end is, they will go all the length, and then whoever, like, if a person posts this report, or someone's going on the news and saying what the report says, then this person becomes a hate object. And especially on social media, is like when someone posts this fact, then they will engage with you, and then they will tell you like, oh, but this is wrong because the pathologist is corrupt, he got paid, or they did something wrong, or it's fake, or all these kind of things. And at the end of the day, all they do is, they want you to respond in a way that they can step back and say, I'm blessed, I was right, I see now this idiot thinks it wasn't a gunshot wound. Which, of course, it's not the individual Twitter user or social media user or the news reporter, it's the fact from the report. But then they feel like reassured into, I'm just above this, I have more knowledge than they, and I can disregard, and they rebalance themselves from this confusion state about something about myself is under attack. This fact is challenging my self-concept, and then going back to baseline. I'm just great, these kind of people, I can't. But I get a lot of society at the moment, especially, is that way, unfortunately. But this is the concept. So now there's another very like fundamental underlying pattern, and this is basically their own super ego, to say it this way. So in general, your brain usually, when you grow up, your parents are like, "Oh my God, you're so special. You're the most beautiful, most cute." Yeah, they hyper you up, and you don't have to do anything in order to be the best of the best, besides shitting in your diaper, farting, eating, and now and then a smile. But you don't have to provide anything in order to get this hype, hyped up self-esteem tone, usually, unless you come up from a house with parents who are like my parents. To be honest, my parents, there's both of them, they are completely fact-based, fact-driven. Like my dad, engineer, my sister, she studied physics and science, and everyone. So they're not these kind of people going into emotional arguments or anything. They're more, they just hammer each other with facts. So if they have an argument at the dining table, then it's about some mathematical calculation or something, and other people just zone out. But in general, most people, they're what's basically inside of them. They think they are special, grandiose, all these kind of things, and the way they deflect all facts presented to them is basically by deflecting it completely and saying, I have a secret with them, and I'm above those people. The other people, they just don't understand how much I know, and this is just way too complex for them to understand. You see this a lot of times with conspiracy theorists. It's some of these things, if you spend time and you're listening to it, it's weird. And if you have a question, then it's just, you're not one of us yet. We have more knowledge. And I remember, for example, during COVID-19, some of these people, they were really nuts. I remember I've been with my van in a small town, and a guy came in. I was like, "What's he doing in my van?" And it was a small round sticker, and he glued the sticker on my van, and I couldn't even figure out what the hell it was. And I asked him, and he tried to explain to me, this is some spiritual magnetic sticker, and the sticker is protecting me from negative vibes because COVID doesn't exist. It's all negative vibes. And I was just like, oh my goodness, So he thought that he was actually laughing about the medical teams and the doctors and stuff. And he was like, oh, they just don't know as much as I do, They are down there and they think all this virus stuff, but it's not. This is all something bigger from the universe. And you suddenly realize these people think they're so above everyone else that the facts, they don't reach them, because the whole concept of what's real and what's not is out of the window. So you can come up with anatomy and say, oh, look, this is how you breathe, this is how your heart beats, and they simply say, no, it's not. And it's like, you just think that's that way because you don't have enough knowledge. It's all just, power, and you think, okay, right. So but you see this self-concept at this point. There is also a name is called spiritual narcissism. It's when people think, oh, I'm so above, I'm so enlightened, and everyone is just weak. When they get stressed or something, they are just weak, so they feel they are completely above. That's why when we had this whole self-help tsunami taking over social media and bookstores, you saw this spike in people thinking, now they watched a video about yoga and now they think they are the Dalai Lama. So but you see the concept why you can't reach them with any facts you might want to present. And this also plays into a form which is called a communal narcissist. So the concept of a communal narcissist is only, when it came up, maybe like 6-7 years ago. And it was a very interesting concept, because usually when you talk about narcissistic people, you have, I don't know, like the guy who thinks he's the best and goes what, or other people thought, like Amber Heard or these kind of things. But people realized after a while, and especially when you work in social groups, volunteering, all these kind of things, or charities, sometimes you were really wondering, like, okay, we're all here for a good cause, right? But why is he or she acting so weird? And it's just pissing me off. And you just thought, why is someone just bumping here into this team meeting and just taking over, and behaving like God knows what? And this isn't actually when psychologists had a look into this. And this became a very interesting concept. Basically, a communal narcissist, they will inject themselves in charities, good cause things, volunteering. That's how they get a foot into it. And they don't feel superior because of their looks or something. So when someone feels superior because of their intelligent or good looks, then you have this one here, and is this part of the narcissism. But the communal ones, they get the reinforcement about, oh my God, I'm so great because I'm so kind-hearted and I help so many people. And here's some of the major hallmarks, which they basically, they're Mother Mary at the end of the day. They're like a saint. So they will inject themselves in all these volunteering programs, but then they attempt to take over. And this is not just the worst part. The worst part is actually that if you think you can work with them constructively to make a change, like even when it comes to we want to fight AIDS or something, it's not, because for them it's, I want to be the face out there. I want to be the face of this campaign, and I want to be seen as this wonderful person. And they try to get everyone out of their way. They will tolerate some idiots just following them, but you need more constructive people to bring in more ideas. They will just kick them out. The other thing is they will constantly brag about how much time they spend helping other people, and then they will exaggerate, like, oh, they had to go through such a hardship to help these other people, and what they had to sacrifice for it. And at the end of the day, it's not about the cause they are fighting for. It's not about fighting AIDS or racism or anything. It's about they want to be the center of the attention of what they do. And in a very cruel way, they use this very serious cause, which gets a lot of empathy and sympathy from people, to make themselves look like a saint. And there are also then the people who say, so whoever has a good idea, they will just say, look, I know all of this, yeah? You're way too late for this party to be able to say anything about this. So it's a really strange interaction, and it's sad, because if it's something like a charity or something, I had charities where I walked away from, and I said, look, I just can't handle it, because all the progress we made is gone. It was just hijacked, taken over by a person. And then I waited a few months until then finally other people realized the same thing. But it's horrible. You can't work with it. It's a power struggle where you think, why am I suddenly in a power struggle where there shouldn't be a power struggle? Yeah. I don't want to make any references now to a certain podcast, but you see a bit, if you dig a bit into this, you see some parallels in all of these things, which is really sad, because this is literally a threat for our society, because we need social and kind people to help others, and we need charities and all these kind of things. But when people in the end walk away saying, like, I can't deal with it, this is really it knocks away our support system, and this is very dangerous, unfortunately. Okay, now when we look back to the facts that make people angry, and this is the concept what I explained before, that the facts, you can't really argue with them. So then the target becomes this faceless person or this internet user, whoever is presenting it. And the most important thing about this here is, it doesn't matter what the person who posts the fact is actually thinking. Like, I can post a study, and the study might say, I don't know, tomorrow it will rain. Yeah. That doesn't mean my desire is that it rains tomorrow. No, maybe I'm actually really pissed off about the fact that it might rain tomorrow. But you post the fact, that's what the weather forecast says or the statistics says, and people associate it completely with you. So, oh, you want it to rain, so why do you want it to be rain? And people go completely overboard with it. And I think I found it, and they will also disregard anything else. So they just take away everything. It doesn't matter if you've been a nice person or anything like this. They just reduce you to this association they made, and it's really tricky. But when people wonder, especially when you look online, they abuse everything, and a lot of times people asking why or how can it be that people behave so horrible. The underlying concept here is called objectification. This is basically a person takes away everything what makes you a human being, and they see you as an object. This is also how people, when you look at some of the serial killers and stuff, a lot of them, they don't see their victim as people with feelings and families and all this kind of things. It becomes an object. And that's why it's for them much easier to do the most horrible things to them, because there's no deeper connection to them. But so I give you the main four reasons for it is, or five. Um, the one is beliefs, which means if you think, these people in this class there, they are unworthy, it's much easier to treat people like crap. And you see this, I think, a lot in society, especially when you see somewhere a homeless guy sitting there, and people just flip a coffee over his head and all this kind of nonsense. Then goals is another thing. Soldiers, for example, soldiers, when they defend their country, they can't sit there and look at the other soldier and saying, "Oh my God, maybe he's a nice dad. He's probably a really nice guy. He probably likes gardening or stuff. But I know he has a gun to my head, so maybe I just do nothing." So you can't really do that. And the same is, by the way, if you work in the medical field, which is weird because a lot of people think, "Oh, you must have so much empathy." It's actually, oh, don't. Honestly, if you're a person who's diving in and, oh my God, and it must hurt so much, you might have to put a needle straight through, and you want to help this person. So if you sit there suffering with them, it doesn't get you far. And at the end of the day, a lot of doctors you see they go by, this is a machine, okay, this is not an X-ray. I see a machine, it's not a human being, and now we fix it. This is the most efficient way. Or if you work with cancer patients, if you hear all their life stories, I mean, you get a meltdown. You just think this planet is just screwed up. We are all just screwed up, and you literally lose any pleasure in life. But you have to go back to, okay, where's the issue? We need to sort this issue out. So it can be a good thing, and it can be a very bad thing at the same time. So nothing is always good or bad. Then intentions is another thing. If a company needs to get rid of employees, they can't think about, oh my God, I really like him. Oh, I know he has this family and stuff. So it just becomes a number. We have to get rid of 6,000 people, and we kick them out. It's a self-protection mode as well. Otherwise, people wouldn't probably make these decisions. And the other part is some people, they act out of fear. They think like, oh my God, there's a very dangerous person, or it's a very dangerous situation where there is none. And sometimes you see these weird TikTok videos where people film someone go completely insane in a supermarket. It's like, oh my God, and this guy, and you think he didn't do anything, but the person perceived it as, this is a threat. So, and then this person doesn't really care. They call the police on them, they beat them, God knows what, and you just think it's completely overreaction. But for them, this person isn't a person in that moment. It's simple, a blank object, and this is danger, and this is the concept. And it also can happen in close relationships where partners start to treat their partner in very horrible ways, because it becomes objectification. And in this instance, you need to go back. So that what you do is you sit down with them and say, do you remember the first time you went out with them? What did you really like about it? And then sometimes you actually get people to really hard thinking. It's like, oh, I liked his laugh, isn't that? And with these type of conversations, you try to give some humanity back to them. So like, see them as a human, this is the same person. And you can reverse these types of thinking patterns, especially objectification. Usually it's a temporary thing which serves a need, and you can reverse it. There are only a few people who have this this thinking pattern nearly is a permanent thing. And at that point we go already into like psychopathic brain, all these kind of things, where I probably will make a video on it as well. But these kind of people, this is a constant thing, which is, it's kind of frightening when you think there are some people out there, they only see everyone else as an object, and they wouldn't have an issue with cutting you in half or stuff. So, but usually it's reversible, and at some point you might get someone to see you again in a more human light and not just as an object. So how usually this whole escalation with all of these thinking pattern goes, it's at first when a person is presenting a fact, then the first thing is they will try to discredit the fact. It's just saying that's all just not true. From there, you will go in another stage, which is then the denial, or they try to discredit the other person's ability. Then, for example, the report was non-proper. If they don't know about it, because did they actually study medicine, or are they just a professor for medicine without studying it? Everything will come under scrutiny and everything is bad. So they try it this way, and at some point they might hit a wall with these accusations and all these kind of things. So then you come to the next step, and this is the character assassination. Then this is then where it goes completely into crazy town, where they will say, oh, this doctor, he just said it on purpose. He's probably some corrupt dick. Someone paid him money, like he has other motives, or he just says it because he hates gays, he hates immigrants, and all sorts of things. So now their brain tries to make logic. They try to find the circle. So now we need to reason somehow. So they will jump to these kind of things. The next step is then where when there's no other way out, then it's like there is something much bigger behind it. This is all a big cover, but I can see through it. So they will spin a conspiracy theory. When nothing else fits to discredit something, or a fact, or a person, then this is all just a big conspiracy theory. They don't want us to know things. This is the other step. And then this is then the absolute last step, is when everything else failed, a conflict becomes just a war, and the only intention is basically to wound another person and to deflect the blame and the shame. And this is then where you see, especially on social media, mass reporting, insulting, name calling, or you also see this a lot of times when you have some protests in town. We had a lot of protests for like climate change and transgender, and this stop oil was really big in the UK. When people try to engage on a valid basis, coming with facts and numbers, you saw this escalation cycle literally in real time in front of you. It was like discrediting, oh, the numbers are wrong. Then, oh my God, you just say it because you actually hate these and these people. And you're like, no. And then you had the big conspiracy of governments doesn't want to know people. And then if nothing else worked, then you saw the one group of protesters like throwing stuff at the other half and all these kind of things. And to be honest, sometimes I was just sitting there and I was just like observing, because I was like, it's just so weird. I was like, I just want to have a look. And at the end of the day, when you're wondering like, why are people online, and then why do they want to get another account down, or silence people, it's basically because they don't want to be confronted with their own challenge of their self-concept, which brings us back to the beginning. So they are like, oh no, I want to preserve myself. And every time the other person posts something which would challenge my view, I don't want to see this. And that's why it becomes very hateful. And this is unfortunately also a lot of times the end of any, like you can't go back from there. It's just ridiculous when this cycle spins that way. But I can give you an example where you can actually see it would be so much better if we wouldn't react that way. So I'm from Germany, and my family, they've been refugees in the Second World War. So we had people going concentration camps, all these kind of things. So as a summary, I'm definitely not friendly towards right-wing people. But at the same time, so when I was in Germany, I wanted to go shopping once, and I saw some left-wing protesters, and they were shouting, and they gave me a flyer or something when I tried to go shopping, and they said, over there they are the right wings, and God knows what, they hate every immigrant and all these kind of things. And then I walked past the right wings and I went shopping. And on my way back, and I was constantly thinking, I was like, I don't know. My granny lived during Hitler. We had the Holocaust, all of this. And I was like, I can't believe any of those guys want to have Hitler back. I mean, it obviously didn't work out, right? And they don't even look as if they want to serve in the military for Hitler. I mean, I just couldn't make sense. And then I was standing there and I was like, I don't actually know what these right-wing people actually want. So what's actually their goal? So on my way back, I walked past these right-wing guys and I asked this one guy if I can ask a question. He was so confused because he obviously didn't think someone asked him in a nice way. And I said to him, I just want to know, what do you guys actually want? And I said to him, I don't know, do you want Hitler back or what's the whole story behind this? And it was interesting because they've been so shocked that someone actually wants to talk to them. And I explained to them the background of my family, and they were actually sitting down. It was like, hey, look, we have the issue now when we talk about immigration, and they came basically with numbers about employment, housing, economy. So you saw, okay, so we are not talking about the Holocaust, about killing people because they are Jewish or something. So there was a more political discussion about how we challenge housing, economy, jobs, all these kind of things. And after a while, I saw someone from this left side protesters coming towards me, and it was interesting because this guy he had studied, I think, economics and also some sociology stuff. And I turned around and I said to him, hey, look, they have an interesting concept about the numbers, and they engaged in a productive conversation. And honestly, I think I just spent 3 hours there standing and having calm conversations. And it was so refreshing because you saw two people from different ends talking to each other about the facts and not seeing each other like, oh, this is a Nazi. They are just bad. And they are left wings. They are just bad. They were talking about the facts, and it was so. I remember I was so happy at the end of the day. One of these guys said, like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't know about this and that. And it was a very nice conversation. And that's why I always said, I don't step, I don't say I don't talk to anyone. This is the thing. I'm very open to talk to people, or even people who've been in prison for crimes, because I don't really look directly at this person. I'm just more interested. It's like, what makes you think that way? Where does it come from? What did lead to this situation? And we need more open conversations about things, because it's so interesting how we can learn. And this is a sad thing when you see on Twitter when people, they all block or they're just spamming, because I'm a person, I like to get different opinions on it. If you can have a conversation, if you can explain to me where you come from, I'm so happy that you share it with me. And then I can say, oh, this is interesting. I want to look it up. But now we see also on social media, like some groups, they are pro, some groups are cons. And it's not really that mixed information anymore, which is sad because it takes away that we can actually learn. The next slide is for people, if you are interested in couples and relationship interactions. Basically, all of these patterns and the escalation cycle is based on this guy, John Goodman, and he basically said there are 4 horsemen, and they are causing the whole cycle of communication breakdown, conflicts, all these kind of things. And as you see, there are different behavior patterns. The first one is like criticism, which is what we just saw. You attack another person for their personality, and your only aim is to proving them wrong. This is shutting down the conversation because you don't want to learn. You don't want to listen. You just want to win, and it shouldn't be about winning. The other one is stonewalling. This is, I have to say, people can argue with me, but stonewalling, this is really getting to me. That drives me nuts. Is when people just like, I'm just not talk to you, or blocked, or door slamming, this kind of thing. They don't want to engage in anything. They are unwilling to hear or see any information. They are like, I can't see or hear anything. I'm fine. They drive me insane. and it's toxic because you can't resolve a conflict with these people. If you have, like, in an interpersonal relationship, it would be a bit like the dismissive avoidance. They like to just sit there like, I'm a chair, I don't exist, and you just like say something, so you can't come to a resolution of the conflict. It's very frustrating. Um, you have then the contempt, which is just where someone is going into the attack mode, and it's just, oh, you're just a bitch, you're a cunt. You're like, it just doesn't go anywhere with name calling and all these kind of things. This is what I'm always saying is, like, at a certain point, people go back to when they were 5-year-olds and they're just saying, your mommy is fat. And you're like, great, it doesn't solve our political discussion, but if it makes you happy to insult my mom, it's fine. So it's just so immature, but this is still actually kind of frightening how many adults act that way as well. And then you also have the concept of this defensiveness. Now, these people, they see themselves as the victim, and they excuse everything. So even when you have facts presented to them, then it's like, no, it's just wrong, or I didn't do it on purpose. No, it was an accident. Or all these kind of different things. And the more you basically confront them with a fact, then they will blame the other person, which is of course also a very frustrating strategy, because this is like, it's dancing a very toxic tango, really. So you say something, they come back with an excuse of blaming someone, and you give something, and this is a toxic dance, as I always say, because the problem is, when someone is stonewalling you, you see like, okay, there's no point me saying anything. Someone is just shutting you out, and that's it. But with the defensive ones, it's like you constantly think like, oh yeah, and now you understand it, now you get it, we are so close, and then no, okay, we are back again. So you just think, I'm so close to solving it, and you get it, and then they don't. It's frustrating, but if this is a main concept, which is, as I said, it originated from the interpersonal relationships, and then you can see this behavior pattern even at workplaces, interestingly. But let me give you an advice. If you ever sit down with a manager and you try to tell him, I think your behavior pattern is like blah, blah, blah from the Four Horsemen, they are not very inclined to listen to you, and they don't like. So just don't analyze your boss or something. They don't really like it. The other very interesting fact about this whole concept of this bias and self-justification is, if people would be able to dig deeper, it probably, all of their behavior patterns would come down to their own vulnerability. And this is because usually you feel like this whole cognitive dissonance is something you feel the most when you're very passionate about something, or when it's very personal, or you have a like a trigger point where you think, oh my god, like someone. I'm wondering if I should bring it. I bring the example. I'm sorry about that. We all know there's a podcast host who has an issue with vocal fry. Okay. So now when you look at this situation, okay, someone has an issue with vocal fry, which means someone could do training, vocal training. They could probably do something with the microphones, I'm not sure, breathing techniques, which means it becomes clear this podcast host has an insecurity about it. So she knows probably about it, or I have a vocal fry. So now, if there would be enough self-awareness to say, okay, this is my problem, I want to solve this problem, there would be steps you can take, like a vocal coach and all these kind of things. But if someone doesn't take these steps, then it is basically just like, oh, no one mentioned it anymore. No one's allowed to say it is bullying. So then you see, okay, it is the underlying vulnerability of a person. This is their red buzzer, their raw point, and they become so defensive because it's a bit like they don't want to face their own shame or something. And it's very hard, because a lot of times you just want to go to people and say, hey, look, there's nothing to be ashamed about it. We can just solve it. We can work on it. How about that? But a lot of people, they are stuck in the stage of just, I'm aware of this and I don't want anyone to mention it. And, everyone are gonna set them on fire if they mention it, which is then also a bit ironic because the same people are the ones who mention it the most. For example, with this podcast host, we see in a lot of interviews, she brings up, I had to do so much comments about my vocal fry and stuff, where you think even people who didn't recognize it until then, they now know all about it and they will pay attention to it. So it makes it actually worse. But the basically, so the most important thing about is to keep in mind it is someone's own vulnerability and they don't know how to handle it. And they could just stand there and saying like, well, yeah, I have a vocal fry, and so what? If you don't like it, listen to someone else. Just having a bit of guts to simply say if you don't like it, then deal with it. But or they work on it. But it's just some people, their own vulnerability has such a grip on them that I can't even be angry about it sometimes because I'm like, they're a bit a victim of themselves, and self-awareness would help, but some people just don't want to do it. The other very important aspect of all of this is it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's literally that someone is too stupid to even realize how stupid they are. And this is a bit like this how's the saying going where someone says being stupid is a bit like being dead. You're the only one who doesn't realize it, and this is literally what it is. So some people, they have such a weird image of themselves that they literally think they have so much knowledge and skills that they overestimate their own competence. I saw the guy who does the podcast Body Bags the other day. I mean, he has a lot of knowledge, and he posted a review where someone recommended him to get some medical training because apparently he wouldn't know about some names, the medical terms. And it was like so weird. It's like, thanks, Karen. You watched the season from Dr. House, and now you're qualified. And telling someone with that experience and that education about you just really wonder, and you question yourself at some point, like, are they narcissistic, or what makes you suddenly believe you can have this hardcore opinion on there? Or when I watched Duty Run, and they had a pathologist on there, he explained the autopsy report and everything. Lord, have a look at the comment sections. Like, people were getting completely insane about this guy, and they were literally like knowing it better. It's like, no, he doesn't know what he's talking about. No, he has no knowledge. And no matter what you told them or even presented with facts, they still thought they are above him. And it's, sometimes you just have to let go. But this is a effect. And by the way, this is actually kind of sad. It's very, very hard to break through. And if you think that this person might come to the conclusion at some point, oh, guess what, I'm really dumb, it probably won't happen. So it's sometimes you just gotta step away. I wanted to bring this part in the presentation because, especially when we look at this whole true crime and social media, in all of this is a very interesting concept, especially when we look at criminal cases and court cases. And this is the concept of the ideal victim. This is not irony or parody or something, it's a concept coming from criminology. So initially during the 1940s and stuff, they explored what makes a victim, or what behavior patterns does a victim actually display. And then during the 1980s, Muse Christie, she developed the typology of what is the most innocent, the most ideal victim. And I will probably make a separate video just on that alone, because this is so important when we look at jury trials. Because it's not just about how you see the defendant, it's about how you see the victim. Especially when it comes to sexual assault or anything, that like the victim is more under scrutiny than the perpetrator. Like they get like analyzed with everything they do. But it's interesting because as much as you would like to think like, oh, I'm not thinking like that, I'm not one of those people thinking with the ideal victim theory. You will call yourself at some point to have the exact thinking pattern. So in general, they developed a hierarchy of victims. It sounds cool, but it is actually not, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's basically to see which victim gets the most sympathy from society. So on the very top, you have ideal victims. And the ideal victims, they display a certain set of characters. They're usually, so they're vulnerable in any way. Then their age plays a huge role. They are either very young, like kids, children, or elderly. They are very respected, and also they are blameless. They are innocent. It's the typical example. It's like, the old granny coming home from shopping and some rude person steals her handbag, and everyone is like, oh, how can you? This is the thing. But also, so if then a victim appears in court, they're usually not the ones having like blue shaved heads, piercings, tattoos. So like they have a very slick appearance, say like that. Then a very interesting portion is actually it's the 65% ideal victim, because these type of victims, you won't feel that much of emotional connection with them. And it's weird because of course they're a victim, but it just doesn't hit you that hard. The typical thing would be like, okay, they're a bit middle-aged. They might take a little bit of a risky behavior in normal amounts, like, okay, getting maybe sometimes going out or maybe getting to the pub, all these kind of things. And they are not really vulnerable. So a perfect example would be you have a 45-year-old investment banker, and he likes going to some after-work drinks. And one evening, when he's a bit, maybe a bit drunk, he gets robbed on the way home. It's not really the type of victim where people are like, oh my God, my heart goes out to him. It's just like, oh yeah, shit happens, right? So it's odd. And on the very bottom, you have the non-ideal victim. These are the type of people who get the least amount of sympathy from society. And these are really, they are seen as not innocent. They are not blameless, and they have a high amount of risky behavior. Is the type of people like homeless, sex worker, alcohol, drug addicts, or people with a criminal background. Because this is the other thing. If you have a victim and then someone brings up, oh, by the way, don't you have a criminal background? And didn't you beat someone up? This is bad. An example would be, for example, a 50-year-old homeless guy who has alcohol problems and then has a fight with other homeless, drunken people and gets beaten up. Not many people would be outpouring in empathy and would put his picture up and go out riding on the street and saying justice for Jim or something. It's just, it doesn't hit you that much. And this is actually sad, because when we think we have empathy, we are kind, but actually you realize like you don't respond to each victim the same. And this has a huge impact on the media, because this is the main reason why some crimes make it to the media, why they get the attention, and why money is invested in the investigation, and why people are like, oh, demanding justice and it has to be reinvestigated, because something triggers the emotional response. And a lot of other cases, they deserve as much as the other case does, but it just doesn't connect very well with people, which is sad. It's sad. So I wanted to give some real life examples here about the hierarchy. So you have the ideal victim as Gabby Petito is the ideal victim. She is like, she tried to live like the American dream, going out with a van. She's young. It'd be like, you can't say anything would make people really dislike her. You don't really find any dirt on her. And the most important thing is, with the perfect victim situation, it's not just the victim herself, but the families, partners, and the people who then talk to the press. They are also part of this victim picture. With Gabby Petito, for example, it was interesting because they made such a huge effort for the search. But at the same time, in the area of the national parks, there were like countless Native American girls missing, and no one cared. Like no one searched. But with Gabby Petito, that's why it was controversial for some people, saying that why does she get so much attention? Doesn't mean she doesn't deserve justice, but the others do as well. But she is so like this, this picture where you can, and the mother as well. Like her parents, they're like, oh my God, they were beautiful, like they were nice, kind, and people could connect to them, and then were sobbing with them in front of the TV. Really, you couldn't find any dirt on them. Amazing, you can put them out there without getting any bad headlines. Then the next case is Summer Wells. So this is actually sad because Summer Wells is an innocent kid. She will actually fall in the first category. But what tints her whole case is literally her parents. This is the problem. It's not this, when you have usually children, they're always seen like as innocent and maybe even abused from parents, so they're like on the highest category of victims. But with Summer Wells, unfortunately, is you have more talk about this weird behavior from the parents and addiction and God knows what's going on in this household, all this kind of thing. So it does actually put her down. It stains her image, and this is sad because, you know, let's just say she would be. Look, Maddie McCann, perfect example. My goodness, what a search effort and how much money went into this. You don't see the same behavior with Summer Wells, do you? Like there's not all around the world pictures and people spending and donating millions and stuff. You don't. There's basically like, I don't know, some you don't even hear much about her anymore, and the main headline is when the dad gets arrested again or something. It's sad, but it's not about her, it's about her parents. And at the very bottom, it is sad, it is really sad, but let's be honest, Paul, he was screwed from the beginning. I mean, you know, not only his association with his dad, which we see now also with Buster, which is just, okay, look, people are not very empathetic towards it, but then you also have his involvement with Mallory Beach. So you have, he's not seen as innocent, he has risky behavior like his drinking, he's like, oh, disrespected because he can't stick to rules of society, and his dad is a dick. So it is literally the worst you can happen for a victim because, I mean, we saw it in the trial. Most of the times they mentioned Paul, it was, and the boat, Paul, and do you remember when he got wasted and knocked the boat against the bridge? So it's very hard to feel empathetic. And at the same time, I saw the struggle with people, and honestly, I caught myself with the same struggle because I remember when I was at Creighton Waters or something, he made once the attempt to say, Paul, you were such a nice boy. And I immediately was like, ask the Beach family about it. And I'm like, no, hang on, he's not even found guilty yet. I was like, hang on, but you couldn't separate these things in your brain, which was stunning. But this combination is literally the worst. You have such a hard time to get someone feeling empathetic. But because of this is this is what you see on social media a lot of times. This is really toxic and dangerous for our society, is the overglorification of victims. And I just gave you some examples. This is, for example, this is from Gabby Petito, already displayed like an angel. You have the Idaho girls, very interesting. Ethan and Xena, like they didn't get that many attention, but why? Because Maggie and Kylie, they were this typical like young girls looking completely innocent, all these kind of things. They hit all the parameters of what you need for the perfect victim, the ideal victim, which this connects to people, and people are like, oh, reliable as well, the parents reliable, all these kind of things. And giving Maggie Morgan maybe a bit when you looked in. No, but even her dad, yeah, her dad appeared completely fine. Xena, on the other hand, then you already have with her the issue with the mother. It's already affecting how you see her. Ethan, the parents are amazing, but Ethan is just a tall guy who looks like a football player, and people are like, he's not very vulnerable, right? So he doesn't come across that emotionally, attracting to people as for example these two women. And then you have all these video made about like, oh, Angel never forgotten, and we have this over clarification of victims. And this brings us also back to the first thing, because it's about what you create in your head, which means now we create a victim that is so perfect. It's like an angel, and they never did anything wrong, the kindest person ever. And then you have these people online, they're like, oh my God, and all this kind of thing. So now anything that could stain this image is a threat. And now you see why you have very increasing conflicts on social media when you talk about victims or you bring up anything about a victim, and people immediately go to victim blaming, which is something completely different, but it explains itself. So essentially, you have a victim at the top, and the person is a victim. They're perfect, they are kind, they're innocent, intelligent, cute, all these kind of things. But at the same time, the very same person, they can cheat on their partners. They might bully others a bit in school, or might sometimes be a bit nasty. They might have consumed drugs, or might even be a perpetrator in other cases themselves. The problem is what you see now with people. People can't see this all together anymore. They split. So, which means you either have someone saying, perfect, innocent, kind, and anyone who would bring up, or it would just emerge from someone saying like, oh, I think the person cheated on all their partners or something, oh my God, that's victim blaming. No, it doesn't mean that caused them, or that would justify the crime that happened to them. It's part of the one person. And interestingly, usually when you're a kid around like 3 4 years old, you learn to, like, before that you have a bit like the black and white thinking. What you see also in a lot of people with personality disorders, they either glorify or negate another person. It's a black and white thinking. Borderline is example where this is spinning around all the time. Usually when you develop as a child, you learn to see people like, yeah, my mom, she's a nice person, she's kind, everything, but she can be a bit of a pain in the ass sometimes, right? And it doesn't make her a bad person. It's just no one is perfect, and we all have our flaws, and we all, my goodness, I think if everyone would dig in our past or something, I think everyone would find something. I'm always looking at people, I'm like, so this is our whole life story. Why is there no one saying, you know what, she was a bit of a bitch? Because I am sure, like, everyone would have someone like this, but this is the thing, people can't combine it anymore. And to give you an example, there was a young girl, she was around 5 years old, and she was really lovely, she was nice. But a lot of times she lost her shit. And when she lost her shit, it was really that she would get violent, physical violent, or she would trash stuff and throw marks and all these kind of things. So when you sat down with her and you tried to talk to her about the behavior and asking, for example, why are you doing it? It was very interesting. She didn't say, I do it because of blah. She said, that's not me, that's the other one. So she created two versions of herself. The one was the good one, the one was the bad one. And she couldn't get the concept in her head that good, bad, sad, happy, all these kind of things can exist in one person. So the main thing was to get her to see herself, all these two sides basically, as a one person of her, and as herself, and then trying to take a responsibility and trying to find her trigger points. So this is interesting. We see, you saw this issue with children when they reflect on other people or on themselves, but now you see it on social media, so, like, spiking because of this glorification we do, that people seem a complete inability to accept anything that is not perfect, which is very weird. And I think it's also very toxic because what you actually create? You create the fear that someone is appearing human and not unrealistically perfect. You know what? I think if one of my friends would go missing the next day, and people would ask me, I think I would be afraid to say, I'd be like, she's a lovely person, all those kind of things. But you know what? Sometimes she gets wasted and I don't know how she got home. So I would be afraid to even say that because I know exactly people would be like, oh, how can you say this? And then, or for example, to say like, oh my God, then she's not perfect. So she won't we won't look for her, she wouldn't get the media attention. It creates fear from people to actually come forward with how a person really is. So all you get is getting more and more a filtered version of it. And the perfect example, I thought, because this really combined everything, there was George Floyd. And it was, I like really, it was, I was sitting there and I was just like, I can't believe it. You know, we've heard about him. He was a loving father, he was a gentle giant, he was kind-hearted, caring, loved his children, all these kind of things. And of course, he was a victim, and we all saw what happened to him, and it was horrible. And I'm glad that this other guy went to prison, and it should have never happened. It's horrible. But at the same time, you see him as this person, and then you have theft, armed robbery, drugs, aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. And if you would talk to these victims, then you would suddenly get a different story. Then you would hear he's a perpetrator, which means George Floyd is like, just so you can be a perpetrator and a victim at the same time. And I think what people have the biggest issue with it, they think, oh, so when he was a perpetrator, then he can't really be a victim now. Because no, like you can feel empathy for someone who became a victim, even when they've been a perpetrator. Like, look, when someone gets today beaten up in prison and stabbed and all these kind of things, I feel empathy for them. I feel like, oh my God, this shouldn't happen. It doesn't mean that I look back and saying like, oh my God, you're in here for armed robbery. You know what? Glad you got it. Like, no, this is not human. It's weird. And with George Floyd, I saw like how people were splitting, or people were even angry that someone would bring up, I don't know, that he was under the influence of drugs or something. Where I thought, it doesn't take away the victimhood. It's not an either or, but this is what people do. They split. It's an either or situation. So either you listen to the good stuff, or you bring up something which is not so idealistic, and then he's not a victim anymore, which doesn't do anything. We also see similar things with Stephen Smith and Paul Murdoch, for example. Yeah, it was a horrible crime. At the same time, okay, got wasted and he didn't treat people that well. Doesn't mean it takes away his victim status, but for a lot of people, the concept of that a person can be both is it just doesn't work in their brain. And it's very concerning, to be honest, because you think we saw this in children, and now we argue with adults on social media about this very concept. And you think, what did go wrong in the evolution that people didn't develop from the stage of being a 3-4-year-old to be able to see all those things together? Especially when I think, when we look at our partners, I mean, you're probably with your partner because you love them, right? That doesn't mean that my partner isn't a very big pain in the ass a lot of times. You know what? And I can say that, when someone says the same about me, that I'm like, yeah, I know I'm not perfect, I do my best, but I'm just not. So it's fine just to say these things, and no one is just one thing or another. And also, when you look, this is very interesting, you have a lot of these accidents where someone might have driven a car like in a negligent way, like a bit too fast and all these kind of things. You know what? Most of these people, they are just not bad people. And a lot of times you don't see a long record of them like, oh, okay, they can't accept rules or something. It was literally an ordinary, kind, caring person, a family father, God knows what, and didn't pay attention to the speed limit once, and it went wrong. And these are the type of people that you see in front of court, and you see people looking at them, and they just can't make up their mind about this lunatic who drove too fast and injured another person, or simply saying, no, we are humans. He did a mistake. He was overworked. He was tired. Didn't pay attention. It went wrong. Doesn't mean it's the whole person. I will make a video on this labeling as well, because in criminology we have this issue, especially with the jury trials, because this is an issue when the jury is sitting somewhere and they look at a defendant, how they make up their mind what this person is, and these categories. This is not a light switch like on off, he's victim or perpetrator. So you need to find a middle ground, a dimmer basically. This is the hardest part for the legal system what we have, and it's sad. It seems so little amount of people actually get the concept. But I don't give up hope that there's a lot of people maybe out there who actually do understand that people can be both. So I hope in general it might have given you some ideas about some thinking patterns, behavior patterns, and where people are coming from. So a lot of times, especially social media, I try to step back a bit and I'm like, okay, where they're coming from. Maybe someone should work on their own trigger points, do some meditation or something. But I hope it helped you a bit, and I think I will definitely do a video about this victimhood and labeling of people, because especially with the jury trials, it is such a massive point on that. So let me just know in the comments below if you liked it, and yeah, probably see you all on Twitter in a second, I guess.